I'm Brett Cenkus. I'm an M&A advisor and an M&A attorney. I do a lot on both sides. Those are two very distinct sort of processes. On the legal side, it's the documentation, it's the purchase agreement and things like that. On the advisory side, what I do with Jacob out of Brayton Woods, that is helping business owners find buyers, market the company, get the highest valuation, close the deal process-wise. Jacob and I have worked on a lot of deals. I'll let him introduce himself.
Yep. I'm Jacob Roethlisberger, an M&A advisor here with Brett. And Brett and I have worked on a lot of deals together, transactions where we have worked together to bring this process to bear, whether it be determining valuations or going through the negotiation. This size of deal here, we're talking about $2 million to $20 million is our sweet spot. And it's been a fun journey, Brett, working with you on these deals and continuing to consider this opportunity.
Yeah, likewise. So today we're talking about valuation. We're talking about what is the business worth, and specifically we want to get into the different perspectives on valuation that buyers and sellers have. Primarily aimed for sellers, but it is information buyers could use as well. So let's start with the idea of, does a seller need to hire an appraiser to appraise the business? That's the question I get asked sometimes when sellers are starting to think about selling. And my answer to that would be no, right? The buyer's not going to care what your appraiser says the business is worth. Ultimately, you're going to need a professional advisor, and most attorneys don't handle that kind of thing. M&A advisors, business brokers, investment bankers, three terms for the same thing, should help you understand valuation and ultimately run a process that brings out a market-driven price.
Right. That's right. And it's so important to take the steps to go through that process and bring a valuation and an asking price for a deal that will feel right, it will look right, and it will sound right when buyers are looking at the deal. Without taking those steps appropriately, it's going to be hard to really get interest in a deal.
Well, that's a really good point. And sometimes we should explain to sellers that sometimes businesses are listed and you need to state an asking price. Other times there's a process, more often in our world, there's a process run where we aren't going to state an asking price, but we still need to know where to lead prospective buyers. They often won't engage without some idea of what expectations are. So
that's right.
That's important. That either way, you need to know what the business ought to fetch, right?
That's right.
And then there's the auctions, which are sort of rare for smaller companies. I mean, down in the lower middle market, but we run a really organized process there where everyone's just bidding against each other. But
that's right.
We won't spend a lot of time on that. But so yeah, you need to have an idea about valuation, if not actually have an asking price.
That's right. And maybe for a second, you mentioned not an appraisal, not typically being something that's
a formal,
needed, but maybe
appraisal.
Just for a second, when would an appraisal be something that a seller would need to think about, or a buyer would think about?
Well, buyer's going to get one. Buyers rarely in M&A deals do you see a seller or a buyer get an appraisal. But if a buyer is financing the deal, right, with SBA is going to order out an appraisal.
Right.
So one is going to show up in the deal, no question. And then sellers get them for various, some just want comfort on it. They think that's worth it. I mean, a good appraisal is going to run you for a $2 to $5 million business, 10 grand, 15 grand. I mean, it's something like that. And again, not typical, not necessary. The buyer is not going to look at that number and say, oh, I'll pay that. That's not how it works, right? They're going to assume you got the appraiser to say kind of what you wanted, even 100%. Though that might not be true. They're going to, and the market process is going to bring out what this business is worth. But that formal, that's what I mean. You need a valuation done by an advisor. You don't need a 50-page document that says the business is worth $2.875 million. It just doesn't matter. Right. It's not worth the time.
That's right. So we're not talking about appraisals. We're talking about valuation from a different perspective.
Right. And so where does valuation, it starts with multiples. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
Doesn't end with multiples, but it starts with multiple analysis.
It starts with multiples analysis. Let's talk about multiples and how that really kind of comes to bear. And there's a couple of different terms for revenue and how we talk about revenue and multiples. On Main Street, you have seller discretionary earnings, where you're looking at the revenue of the business. And of course, you have to factor in dollars for the dollars that kind of the owner takes in and out of the business. And different, of course, larger businesses, we would look at EBITDA as a factor for how we calculate the business earnings. And then there's the multiplier that we're talking about here for valuation. Multipliers, I think they're out there. You can find them. The first step is to understanding what category your business fits in and the comparable companies, right, that kind of match with what you're looking to sell, and then what the EBITDA or SDE that your company has at the moment, how many multiples of that you would then use to find an asking price for your business. In general terms, pretty simple breakdown.
So you need numbers. You need a bottom line, either EBITDA or SDE, usually, of what this business produces,
multiplied by
a factor, right?
Right.
Yep.
And so talk about, Brett, when you've gotten there, you've pulled together what you believe are solid EBITDA numbers and your multiple, and now you have this value. But inevitably, that's just the starting point.
That's just the starting point. And we should say that it's not as simple as what your financial statements from your accountant say your EBITDA is, right? Or your SDE, which fundamentally just adds back in the seller compensation, the owner's compensation. That's the only real difference. These are just measurements of the cash a business can throw off. But let's talk about EBITDA. It's typically adjusted in some manners. And sometimes that's favorable for the seller. It's like, look, we added back in and raised EBITDA for the country club membership the seller had, because you don't need to, clearly, you don't need to get that. That's not a requirement of this business. So there's add backs and there's takeaways kind of to figure out EBITDA. But then we have, as you said, you find multiples for your business category. And that's the starting point. But multiples very simply will change based on the revenue. We call them revenue bands, right? As revenue goes up, multiples go up. As the company gets bigger and bigger, there's more and more liquidity. Ultimately, public companies have much higher multiples. So multiples are going up based on like revenue bands. And then growth is a big driver, right? A company that's declining versus a company that's in steady state versus a company that's increasing quickly are going to have very different multiples, right? So you've really, and buyers and sellers have very similar perspectives on those things. I mean, they're negotiating. They're going to have to take different stances in negotiation, but I feel like both buyers and sellers understand these concepts and can kind of get their hands around and find a meeting in the middle about, revenue bands and growth and how it should affect things. These things don't seem like they're sticking points. So their perspectives are very aligned. But where do they become misaligned?
Well, I was going to ask you that question. Inevitably, there's a moment where the seller has to face a conversation about the buyer's view of that EBITDA number and where it's trending. Is it trending up? Is it trending down? Or what are some of the risk factors that the seller sees, the buyer sees that the seller isn't thinking about?
Yeah.
Let's talk about some of those things. That the buyer, because they're thinking, I'm looking at buying this business today, but what's it going to look like tomorrow? And so EBITDA, that revenue number that we're using to evaluate the business, is telling a story to the seller, to the buyer. Got to get that right. It's telling a story to the buyer that the seller may not be thinking about.
Right.
So maybe you could talk about that for a second. Where some of those things come into play.
Yeah, EBITDA decline or steady state or growth is telling a clear story. And again, I want to make it clear that I feel like seller and buyer's perspectives are similar. They're going to negotiate differently because they're both trying to get the best deal for themselves, but they're on the same page about this. But the perception, this is really important for our sellers to understand. Buyers come at this valuation question very differently when they start, because it's rooted in a sense of uncertainty, not about what the business is today, but about what it will be tomorrow, right? Will the growth continue? Will the bottom of this business fall out? And so there are many things, and sellers have trouble understanding how these play into valuation, right? And they may not play into your asking price, but they probably or oftentimes have to play into the price you accept, right? Or your willingness to know know that you got the best deal you could. And so these things are things like, is the seller absolutely integral to the business, right? If this seller walks away, is this business going to cave tomorrow? Is it, a hub and spoke sort of system where basically everything comes through this seller? There aren't processes. There aren't people. I mean, the sellers, and this happens more in small business, right?
Yeah.
And it's not a big deal if it's a restaurant or something where the buyer is going to step in and be that person, unless, for example, the existing owner has his name or her name on the restaurant,
Right.
or is there every night
Right.
slapping backs and glad handing.
That's right.
Then you can get your hands around why that's going to look to a new buyer as,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
and
that's
why
right.
you have to recognize as a seller that this business might be worth this in your hands today, but you've got a real risk that's going to be brought into valuation, or at the very least, deal structure, holdback and stuff. I mean,
Sure.
this is because
and it's
because
emotional.
there's fear. Yeah,
It's emotional.
but there's
That's
real
right.
risk.
I think the sellers absolutely can bring an emotional, firm position on why their EBITDA might be higher or more firm because of that very reason. I know exactly how this business runs. I know the value is achievable. I know that our revenue is solid based on my efforts, based on my participation, and that might be the very thing that they're facing a challenge in. And that when the seller's looking at it, the buyer's looking at it, they're thinking, what's the business like tomorrow when you're not part of it?
Right. Right. So this is a big one, and it's solved for by having a business that has people and processes. It is more than just you, and your name on business is not a good thing from a selling standpoint, generally speaking. But you can also, so that's how you solve for it. But you can also show it to a buyer by having other people on your team and other things going on. Hopefully that's not just window dressing.
Right.
It's what is the case, but that's going to make a buyer more comfortable. Another, customer concentration.
Yeah.
It's a huge one.
Yeah.
We just had a deal recently that we were working on where it became a big issue with the buyer because
there's not diversity there.
There's not diversity among the customers. One of the customers is 30% of the business and another's 20. Now you've got two customers at 50. And even though they've been there for 10 plus years, what if they're not there tomorrow? So in that deal, one of the customers is 30% of the business and one is 20% of the business, right? I mean,
right. But does that mean that the deal dies, or does that maybe mean that EBITDA gets adjusted in the transaction?
Well, or the valuation ultimately, right? Yeah. The value.
Well, not EBITDA number, but there will be the valuation. You could potentially get a lower multiple, or it's a risk
however
adjustment
we come at it
to the calculation.
That's right.
For those kinds of things.
Good question. It depends, right? I mean, ideally, from a seller's perspective, what you want is the full value. In this, you want a full value, cash on the barrel at closing, but in this case, you're not going to get it. So it's going to either be a lowering of the value or a structuring of the deal to protect the seller. So earnouts, holdbacks, things like that. Yeah. And the ideal situation when we've got severe customer concentration is full value, but with some contingent earning of some of it, right? I mean, if these customers hold for a year, and that's it all sorts of that's where brokers, lawyers who know what they're doing earn their money to help sellers understand, are we actually going to get that?
I wanted to ask you that question about EBITDA and multiples and how the process unfolds. There really is a science and an art to pulling together how you display the EBITDA.
Absolutely.
And how you've calculated your multiple, right?
Absolutely.
And so I like asking you questions because I feel like you bring that the legal perspective as you're bringing deals together. You just mentioned buyouts. You just mentioned holdovers. So what are some things that sellers can do when they think about, I'm about to face these buyers and I'm considering EBITDA and I'm considering multiples? What can they do to help present their case rather than kind of get caught in a situation where they're reacting to those conversations?
Well, sellers can start early enough to fix these issues, right? Because it doesn't play. We're in a negotiating context. You never fully trust the other side.
Right.
We don't expect someone to outright lie to us, but we expect any other amount of misdirection, misleading, misrepresentation. Like it's not. This is not you and I having a conversation about our business partnership where I expect you to be very. Know what I'm asking, to understand, ask it correctly. Like it's a game. And so
they're looking for
stuff.
So
when the sellers tell you, oh yeah, but this is the issue with that. The customers have been here for 10 years. They're not going to buy it. So you fundamentally have to ideally start far enough in advance to fix the issues. right? If you can't or you didn't, right, then you make your best presentation of the case. You run your best process so there's pressure from other buyers and real demand for this business.
Yep.
If you can get that, then you can get buyers stretching and taking on some more risk.
Yep.
Or you accept a change in your valuation or your structure, right?
Yep.
It's not going to be probably a heavy discount on valuation. And then the structure, right? We need to be very careful, as you know, of like making sure that this is not that our seller has a real shot at earning this money, right? For example, earnouts, right? That's one way to do it. It's like, hey, we'll pay you if these things happen. Often buyers will want to do that based on EBITDA.
Mm-hmm.
And will push back almost universally to try and get it based on revenue.
That's right.
Because I don't know how you're going to run your company. I don't know what extra expenses you'll throw into this thing. I don't know what your other existing businesses will pile on. EBITDA is fraught for problems.
That's right. The revenue is what I've built.
Right.
I've built this revenue
I can see
stream.
It and know it. Yeah.
I don't know how you're going to operate.
Yep.
A year from now, I turn up. The revenue's the same. The company's operated entirely differently, right. And you're using it.
And now I don't get my earnout
to calculate my earnout.
Right.
And that's right. You push back all the time.
Yeah.
And so you're describing a situation where a seller has to be prepared to go. They're going in eyes wide open. They've either solved these issues early on,
ideally,
or they know they exist, and so they're potentially prepared for these conversations,
right,
through their due diligence materials and how they present. These things. Certainly, many of them are going to be found during the due diligence. So you need to be ready to talk about it, right?
Absolutely. Yep. And hit it head on.
You don't want to uncover this stuff.
And you have to hit it head on. Any amount of like, it's just like, there's customer concentration. But those customers are great customers and they're growing and they're solid and they've been here for 10 years. And I don't meet with them. My VP of our business development manager meets with them. He's going to work for you. This is a business that's about me.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right.
I mean, that's how you have to approach that. Hit it head on. Do your best to spin it as a positive in some manner. And again, this sounds like all negative. I mean, you can, I said earlier, if you've got enough demand, which generates buyer deal heat, buyers want to close, then they'll cut some corners and accept a little bit more. And so you do your best to make sure you've got that demand, you feel comfortable, but you've got to be realistic. And that's why I think really helping our sellers understand the buyer's perspective, because sellers will often feel like they're just trying to steal the business. I hear that all the time, right? Don't you?
That's right.
All the time. Usually, that's not the feeling I get. Usually, and we can't really know. Again, it's a negotiation game context, but usually I'm seeing and trying to help our sellers see, as are you, no, the buyer's got legitimate concerns. And the more you can put yourself in their shoes, the more likely you get the most successful outcome. I'm not telling you listen to everything they say, but you got to understand what their concerns are going to be to navigate these waters. You have to.
That's right. They want to make a return on investment and they're looking at the risks.
Yep.
And so I wonder about sellers and how they can be intentionally working with a team to be best prepared for that negotiation ahead of time, right?
Yep.
So some of those things are going to be a give. Maybe you're ready for it. Maybe you've got your negotiating plan in place for that time when those conversations are going to come up. You make your best ask, but you have a strategy because valuation will be a conversation.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that
in this case, right?
Yeah.
At the letter of intent stage, but it's going to be one later.
That's right.
But now often buyers, right, they usually have, often they ask for some high level customer concentration information. Again, it depends on the type of the business, right? You're selling an e-commerce business and no one cares. That's not an issue, right? But a B2B kind of service business, they're going to often try and get a sense. They know what they're doing pre-LOI, but it's going to be part of this question. One way or the other, it's coming into the valuation question, and you need to be prepared for it, right? You need to be prepared for whether or not it's realistic to hold the line and walk away on that deal.
That's right.
If they want to move it once they find out that that's an issue.
Yeah.
Right? So.
Well, one thing, I know we're kind of getting to the end here on this topic. It crosses my mind that it really is important. Two things can happen if a seller doesn't prepare in the following way, which would be to have great due diligence materials prepared. First of all, they get into your data room, they can't find anything, your documents are poorly put together, the deal may not happen at all. you push forward with the deal, it is going to hurt valuation because you've created a sense of risk and a sense of fear that things aren't as you say they are, right? And so the importance of having done the work up front to really put together a solid foundation for presenting your business is so important to achieving the value that you want.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And if it comes to changing the structure, to know what would be acceptable, what would be a good solution to not be caught on the fly when it comes up. And so, yeah, having good M&A advisors, very self-serving comment, but it's important, and that can come in the form of business brokers or investment bankers. It can come in the form of us. It can come in, and then some M&A attorneys know those waters really, really
That's right.
well. So you've got to have people on your side who can help you guide you through that. I don't know how you.
Well, and
The smartest, most curious seller in the world can possibly really do that. It doesn't mean they can't get there. We have another video about do I need to hire an M&A advisor, but it's these kind of things. Yeah, they do take perspective. They do take knowledge and experience, and that's invaluable if you get the right.
That's right.
The right help.
Yeah. Yep. So value. It's conversation.
Yep.
And there are conventions and ways to go about setting value conventionally, and then there's emotional negotiation and things that the sellers are going to face. And it really is. I mean, it's an exciting time for a seller, but something to be well prepared for, knowing that it's going to be a slog. And hopefully the sellers are able to go and get what they want for that business.
Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you have questions, general questions, you could drop them below, comments. If you have specific questions, want to reach out, the way to do that is in the show description. If you have questions about anything, this topic or anything buying or selling a business, don't hesitate to reach out. We appreciate you watching today. Thanks.